This wasn't Jim Brown or Massop, so like the master politician he was. The allegation is that Mr. Seaga stepped back in order to save face politically, and was soon seen in a capacity that appeared to have been limited to the community's athletic and cultural development. Everything else concerning Tivoli Gardens was said to be under DUDUS's portfolio. When Mr. Seaga's reduced role in the community is brought into the discussion, many pundits shy away or have suggested that Mr. Seaga was merely giving DUDUS enough rope to hang himself, but that never happened. Instead, it seemed as though DUDUS was the one hanging others, growing from strength to strength, causing even the eyebrows of Mr. Seaga himself to rise. According to many, he, DUDUS, actually reminded him, Mr. Seaga, of himself. DUDUS was good, very good, to the people of Tivoli Gardens and neighboring environs. He was a progressive don, who not only talked about it, but was about it. He said money over war, and he obviously meant it, because money suddenly seemed to be flowing in the streets of Tivoli Gardens again, and there was no war, not even an inkling of it. In order to avoid being implicated in any street violence, or other acts that could bring unwanted scrutiny, DUDUS needed as little attention as was possible. So like the true strategist he was, in no time he instigated a truce between himself and numerous warring factions, even brokering alliances with some to the surprise of many. And if that wasn't enough, DUDUS went one step further by not only declaring downtown Kingston a safe, crime-free zone, but he backed his talk with action. Forget the police, the real law downtown Kingston was DUDUS. His efforts were felt so much that he has even been credited by government officials for being instrumental in the eradication of certain petty acts of criminality in and around the business district of downtown Kingston, all common occurrences before DUDUS. It must also be noted that it's widely said and accepted by most Jamaicans, at least in the region that this book focuses on, that DUDUS was the one who made downtown Kingston safe again, for residents, business operators and visitors to the commercial district. He is said to have literally and almost single-handedly put a damper on crime, doing what law enforcement was unable to do at the time. But this is a claim that has been rubbished and countered with venom by some, who say all DUDUS did, was put a stop to what he himself had instigated in the first place. All he did, according to those who hold this view, was call off his dogs, and chase off the strays, which wasn't hard to do, with him being who he was in the world of Jamaica criminality. Opinions differ like night and day when this topic comes up for discussion, but even with that being said, regardless which side of the fence one finds themselves on, regarding this specific issue, one thing that cannot be denied, is that there was a dramatic reduction in crime in this region of Jamaica's metropolis. And it wasn't due only to the efforts of the Jamaica Constabulary Force. Money over war. If DUDUS was a preacher, the above would be the sermon he would more than likely be remembered for, because he preached it religiously. The principle was simple. Every man and woman wanted the same things for themselves: their children, their family and their loved ones, security and stability. Their day-to-day realities may have all been different, but their desires were all the same, in one way or the other. DUDUS realized this, and with that comprehension, he devised the self-reliant effort of self-support and self-containment, which worked like this. If you operated a shop, bar or store in the community, it was supported by the community. If you were a mechanic in the area, all the mechanic work came to you, and others even went out and brought work in. He started a construction company that solicited work from a variety of sources, mainly political, which provided constant work for laborers. If you had no job but had a skill, it was put to use and you were paid for said service. DUDUS even went as far as setting up individuals with their own businesses, gave them a start. If the president saw the investment as worthy, gone were the days of random and petty hold-ups. The Don would have none of that in his territory, and if anyone dared to violate, retaliation was swift and deadly. If money was the desire, There was a variety of ways to achieve such a desire without setting the city on fire, and that's how DUDUS set the order, and everyone bought into philosophy like stocks. It is also said that DUDUS was responsible for the opening of establishments such as wholesales, grocery stores, restaurants, and even beauty salons in and around the Tivoli Gardens region, creating the latter, beauty salons, specifically as an outlet of opportunity for females who had the skills, but nowhere to put them to work. There was something for everyone, and if you couldn't do anything, the opportunity to learn was there if you were willing to apply yourself. Hope seemed alive and well. All who dealt with DUDUS directly and indirectly attested to his shrewd but fair practices and principles. A refreshing change to such revered and feared office, and with this, the relationship between him and the people deepened, not only with every act of generosity, but with almost every other move that was made by him. DUDUS could do no wrong. The wool was over the eyes of the people, so much so that without even realizing it, they weren't only elated admirers and respecters of the man they now hailed as the president, but they had become so dependent on him, that their loyalty was both blind and mindless. Bamboozled, maybe, but like it is said, once you have gotten a taste of the good life, it's hard to let it go, even if your life depended on it. This was exactly the kind of position the residents of Tivoli Gardens had found themselves in. They had tasted the good life. Some have likened it to them jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire, with the saddest part being, very few even realizing what was happening, even with the oil in the pot popping and their skin peeling. It was what it was. It came with the territory. But was it really all peaches and cream? With all that has been uncovered, it should not be forgotten that beyond all the enlightening efforts of Christopher DUDUS Coke, there was also a dark side at work. This was Tivoli Gardens, a place whose reputation was born, raised, resided and revolved around a philosophy of violence, bloodshed and death. So with all the positive moves being made by Mr. Coke, it must not be forgotten that the molding, creating, training, preparing and then the activating of gangsters, still needed to be a matter of priority on his list. DUDUS knew this all too well, and viewed it as a vital part of his arsenal, and so it was, the dark side of Tivoli Gardens never left, but was merely camouflaged, an allegation confirmed by many. The efforts of damage control, saving face and manipulating the masses, has been countless over the years, because as was said above, the dark side of Tivoli Gardens was alive and well. This may surprise many, but apparently, in the criminal underworld of Jamaica, it was no military secret that Tivoli Gardens was literally operating as the headquarters of criminality in Kingston, and quite possible even the entire Jamaica. It has been said that if you desired anything illegal, Tivoli Gardens was where it was and where the connection for it was. This was one of those in the street facts that those who needed to know were quite aware of. In addition, it is also said that besides DUDUS's philanthropy, there was also a steady drive to expand his grip on criminality, which came in the form of, it is said, him dealing in all types of vices, which ranged from the sale of marijuana, right up to the more serious accusations of dealing in arms and even murder for hire, and everything in between. During the investigation for this volume, it was also uncovered that Tivoli Gardens served as a kind of command center for criminality, where thugs from all over were said to frequent for meetings of all sorts, to either plot and scheme or squash their differences. It is said that DUDUS was a master in this arena, using his status and power to act as some sort of demigod over issues that were outside of the law, and needed mediation to avoid further issues or worse, bloodshed. From all analysis, from as early as 1997, Tivoli Gardens was operating like a state within a state, with even its own government of sorts, overseeing the progress. It's alleged that just like the government of Jamaica, with an official office and mandate, Tivoli Gardens had organized an unofficial office to bring their mandate to life. And in what could be determined as nothing short of a blatant disregard for the authority of the land, Tivoli, under the control of DUDUS, went as far as even creating an office higher than the one that actually ran the country. Instead of a prime minister, the Republic of Tivoli, as many have labeled it, had a president. They made their own laws, a fact confirmed by the findings that followed the May 2010 incursion by the security forces in search of DUDUS, which exposed the most telling discoveries yet. All confirming that what was once said to be rumors, were in fact, all reality. According to reports, the security forces uncovered what appeared to be a courtroom, equipped with even a gavel. But maybe the most telling and chilling discoveries came in the form of a torture chamber with 2 hangman's noose, and a burial ground, which is believed was used to bury victims who were killed inside Tivoli Gardens. It sounds gruesome, almost like something out of the movies, but believe it or not, this was the dark side of Tivoli Gardens, and the evidence speaks for itself. Once in the racket, always in the racket. Al Capone, 1899 to 1947. The presidential clique. With the problems of the shower posse what they were, indictments, extradition requests, etc., there remained a vigorous campaign to disassociate himself, DUDUS, from anything shower posse related, and with that, along with the embracing of blatant defiance, DUDUS gave birth to what law enforcement has said was nothing more than a new name for an old organization, the presidential clique. Be that what it may or may not have been, just like the gangsters of the 1920s to the 1950s in the United States, who after the golden years of Prohibition, had to change with the times and become a legitimate businessman, DUDUS had to pretty much do the same, in the ever-changing and demanding climate that was leading up to the new millennium, especially with the ever-looming possibility of being implicated on a whim. One of DUDUS's first moves on the road to legitimacy, was a literal taking of a leaf from his father's handbook. Jim Brown may have been known to most as just a gangster, but like all gangsters, beyond the tough persona, there is usually more to the story, and with Jim Brown, the case was the same. Drug dealer and gangster aside, he was also a music lover and a businessman. Jamaica's traditional musical genre, specifically reggae and later dancehall, and the ghettos have always been in cahoots. Most musicians at the time came from depressed and troubled communities, financially or otherwise, still so to date. So they connected automatically with the people and the reality of the garrisons. The impact of music in the Jamaican culture is paramount and well documented, even coming with interesting undertones and elements that go as far back as the 1950s and 1960s, when local musical expressions were first weaved into the fabric of political campaigns, with the aim being, bridging the gaps that divided the populace. Call it manipulation, but the intent of the politicians was simple. They spoke an entirely different language, and they knew that in order to win them over, the masses, they had to convey their message in a format and slang that was palatable, and music became that bridge. Jim Brown had seen and knew the effects of this method all too well, but unlike so many of his affiliates, he also saw the financial benefits from a personal perspective, if indeed he could redirect the flow like he had done with the shower posse. Jim Brown's love for music was well known in the streets and amongst his associates and peers. So it wasn't strange when he decided that he was interested in tossing his hat in the entertainment industry ring, an entity which he was also known to patronize in a fashion that only Jim Brown could, literally buying the bar at many event. That was Jim Brown's desire. He wanted to add music, entertainment, to his repertoire of business ventures. A desire eventually realized upon him duplicating what he had seen his mentor, Claudius Massop, and his rival, Bucky Marshall, orchestrate years before, the One Love Peace concert. Rebuttal. Jim Brown's love for music may have been 100% true, but what many say is also 100% true, was that his desire and eventual investment in said industry wasn't about the love for the music like he would have wanted so many to believe, but instead, this move was about one thing and one thing only, his love for the almighty dollar. He had seen the impact of music, saw how it unified and even divided, and he also saw the business side of it. Some even went as far as saying that his true mission was to use music as a forum to celebrate himself and his exploits, while also making a profit in the process. And still others say, Jim Brown venturing into this industry wasn't all that big of a deal to begin with, most dons did. And from all accounts, Jim Brown's entry into said industry was actually simple and easy, seeing that most of those involved in said industry at the time viewed him as more than a don, going as far as even calling him gods, which is basically saying that he was the god for all dons. Jim wasn't just a dads, as dons were also affectionately called around that time. He was a god, the god for all dads and dons. Bottom line. According to many Jim Brown antagonists, this was nothing more than another effort on his part of accumulating wealth. There was no real love for the music per se. He was a hustler, and that's all he was doing by getting involved in the music industry, hustling. Jim Brown's musical investment. Starting in the late 80s, Jim Brown and his Shower Posse affiliates orchestrated and funded an annual summer concert that showed just how well he had learned the value of utilizing the financially viable medium of entertainment. His concept was Champions in Action, yes. For those who weren't aware, and may have heard of DUDUS's summer production of the same name, this was the same annual summer concert, resurrected by DUDUS and his presidential clique in the summer of 1999. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 9. New King James Version. That which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Jim Brown's Champions in Action was held at the Fort Clarence Beach in Portmore, St. Catherine, and was a literal spectacle of bravado. So much can be said about this event, but one of the major facts that confirm the audacity Jim Brown and his cronies were. This event was one where the display of weapons and gun salutes were no strange occurrence, and we are talking about in the very presence of law enforcement, rifles and all. These productions were also littered with the best that the Jamaican entertainment had to offer, from the likes of the legendary and internationally renowned, Grammy-winning dancehall artiste, Shabba Ranks, and dancehall legend, Ninja Man, who, after making his way on stage and seeing the massive crowd of over 15,000 patrons, most of who were decked out in the traditional JLP color green, a clear territorial marker, was quoted as saying in his 1988 performance, Jim Brown shoulda get show for the year for this ya show ya man. Translated. Jim Brown should get show for the year for this show. Once again, a clear indicator of who this man was, and just how powerful he was, what he had achieved and how he was viewed in the streets of Jamaica, by even the most renowned entertainers of the day. And just for the record, Ninja Man was not the only artiste who went on stage and heaped praises on the head of the man who by now was listed on a federal indictment, which accused him of being involved in over 1,400 murders, and the smuggling and distribution of tons of narcotics into the United States. Note: Champions in Action under Jim Brown's direction was last staged in 1990. Brown was arrested in 1991. DUDUS was smart, but he wasn't the genius many thought he was. He was just smart enough not to reinvent the wheel. Why should he, when the formula was already tested and proven, and now his to use? The re-staging of Champions in Action was DUDUS's first move to legitimize himself on a larger and more global scale. With the re-staging of this production, he not only solidified what was already his, the streets, but he was also making a show to those abroad of just how powerful he actually was. A visual representation of his power, so to speak, the likes of which brought to light the kind of influence he obviously had to have, to pull off such a feat. Note, almost every Jamaican dance hall artiste of notoriety has performed on Champions in Action, at one time or another. Check clips on YouTube. Special note, it has also been brought to our attention during the research and investigation for this volume, that almost all the entertainers on these productions have either performed for free, or for a snippet of their usual performance fees, and in addition, entertainers have also been known to either reserve or cancel prior dates to facilitate performances on said shows, which if not done, was viewed as blatant disrespect towards the president and his cause. It is said that artistes have even been severely beaten, and or threatened, for not performing on said shows. One story recalls the horrors of a top-flight entertainer, who at the peak of his career, claimed to have been too busy for such a performance around 2004 or 2005. A declaration that not only led to him being disciplined like a baby, but also came with the ego-deflating effect that has since led to his relocation to the safer streets of South Florida. Images of artistes have also been known to be used by the presidential clique on promotional material without their knowledge or consent of said artiste management team, as apparently, it is somehow supposed to be understood that every year, this particular date should be reserved for the president, basically what some have categorized as the entertainers paying their dues or presidential taxes. Fact. Regardless where one is from in Jamaica, the reputation of Tivoli Gardens is common knowledge. A reputation that has had such a diverse effect on the society of Jamaica and Jamaicans at large, that it is understandable that entertainers, who are mostly from the garrisons of one sort or another, and who are knowledgeable of the politics of the streets, would not even make an attempt to resist such an advance, or request to perform at the president's shows, whenever such advances were made. So under such circumstances, if what is said is actually true, then such compliance would be very understandable. DUDUS's Champions in Action, a presidential clique promotion, was a success out the gate, and the president was a rock star. Many even say this was when he was unofficially inaugurated, solidified by the masses and the entertainment industry at large. A key development that literally set him on course to becoming what many have said, was the most powerful man in Jamaica, before being toppled from his throne. The first staging of Champions in Action was held at the same venue as his father's original production, Fort Clarence Beach, Portmore, St. Catherine. According to estimates, the show pulled over 10,000 patrons, paying $1,000 Jamaican dollars for general admission. You do the math, that's over 10 million, tax-free, Jamaican dollars for one night. This was without taking into consideration fees for parking, VIP entry, booths rented to vendors, sale of food, alcohol and other beverages. DUDUS had arrived, Act 2. His next power move. Success is said to be the best form of motivation, and after the success of Champions in Action in 1999, DUDUS was motivated. The pieces were in place and he was just getting started, again proving the type of don he was. A clear and razor-sharp cut above the rest, made even clearer, when in true Robin Hood-like fashion. It is said that DUDUS supposedly brought all the spoils from his efforts back to Tivoli Gardens for distribution. This was a summer production, and that meant school was out and would be back in session come September, the start of the school year in Jamaica, and DUDUS, knowing the burden such a time of the year usually meant for parents, did what many deemed a blessing from above, by supplying the majority of, and quite possible all, the children in Tivoli Gardens, with assistance to get back to school, with all the necessary tools for their progress, the start of what was to be an annual reality. This wasn't a priest or some other holy man of God who was doing this. This was DUDUS, a don who was running an organization that was said to be murderously notorious, but still this was what he did. An act that seemed both compassionate and caring. A literal unheard of, never before seen feat at the time, which once again, unknown to his now captive audience, was merely an additional installment on their, by now, already purchased, hearts and minds. In addition to DUDUS's own funds being used in this act of philanthropy, He also commissioned the assistance of his affiliates abroad, who again bought into his concept wholeheartedly, even joining in with contributions of their own, in both cash and kind. Everyone got involved in the Don's humanitarian effort, and Tivoli Gardens loved it. Critics however say, such acts were all a ploy to manipulate and keep the masses in a confused state of dependent stupor, while a greater agenda was being pursued. Some have even suggested that all DUDUS was doing was merely one of those self-righteous efforts aimed at feeling good about all the evil he and his cronies had done, and were still doing. But regardless which theory is true, one thing is sure, DUDUS did do the previously mentioned for his people, source of funds and reason behind his actions making no difference. According to all accounts, DUDUS did for the people of Tivoli Gardens what no other Don had ever even attempted to do before. But DUDUS wasn't done. West Kingston Jamboree. With champions in action under his belt, DUDUS now seemed unstoppable. The turnout at his first production was clear indicator of his power. His affiliates abroad were ecstatic, and as the new millennium inched closer, their support and respect for the Don, who many still had not met face to face, grew at a rather astonishing rate. A rate which not only brought in more money and gifts, but it also brought in more support than many may have even realized. Doors opened and individuals quickly became more receptive to DUDUS's requests and suggestions, which quite often included the updating of or the addition of new weapons to the Tivoli Gardens arsenal. This was said to have been pitched under the guise of community protection, a request that was literally always met, because problem or no problem. The individuals in question were all major advocates of such life-altering tools. In addition, and to DUDUS's delight, soon more of his implants were being welcomed into the land of opportunity, the United States of America. Things were beautiful. DUDUS now had the full support of the masses, both at home and abroad, the support of the entertainment industry, and at the same time, he had found yet another source to make the kind of money he needed to generate, in order to support the status of being a Don, and all this without almost any real political support. Some say that was neither here nor there with DUDUS, because besides Mr. Seaga not being in his corner, his support would have more than likely been nothing much to begin with, since it was common knowledge amongst the Jamaican populace, back then, that Mr. Seaga and the Jamaica Labour Party were battling for political life, after dismal outings at the polls in 1993 and 1997. The loss to their political rivals was stinging, with the PNP, People's National Party, walking away in 1993 with 53 of the 60 parliamentary seats, and almost duplicating the same feat again in 1997, when they were again declared winners, this time taking 50 of the 60 parliamentary seats, all vague comparisons to the glory days of 1980, when he, Mr. Seaga, captained the landslide victory which landed his party in the driver's seat, only to outdo himself a few years later, 1983, when their JLP, Jamaica Labour Party was declared the winner of all of Jamaica's 60 parliamentary seats, after the PNP boycotted the then early elections.